The day my father broke, without saying a single word. Everything that happened still feels unreal, like I'm drifting outside my own body, watching a version of myself I barely recognize. My father, Daniel, wasn't just a film producer in our small coastal country. He was the kind of man everyone knew, respected, and trusted. My mother died giving birth to me, and from that moment on, it was just Dad and me against the world. He raised me alone, turning down every chance to rebuild his life, always telling me his world began and ended with me. When I turned 12, he moved us to a bigger film-centered city as his career kept growing. But success for him meant struggle for me. 2 boys at my new school, Adam and Aaron, mocked me every single day, making fun of the clothes Dad chose for me. Then came the day they shoved me down 2 steps. The school called my father, but he never confronted the boys or their parents. Not because he didn't care, but because work had already swallowed the parts of him I needed most. He loved me, but he wasn't present, and he knew it. When he realized how difficult things were becoming, he sent me to live with my grandparents, just until things settle, he said. They raised me with more love than I can put into words. Dad visited for holidays and birthdays, but over the next 6 years, that's all I saw of him. Slowly, without meaning to, we drifted apart. When I was 15, I overheard my grandparents whispering about something involving my father. I asked them directly, hoping he was finally taking me back. Instead, they told me he had married a woman he met on set. Her name would be Claire. They had eloped just the day before. I felt like my heart dropped. It wasn't just that he remarried. It was that he did so after leaving me behind. When Dad and Claire visited, the moment she walked into my grandparents' home, something about her felt forced. She was overly sweet toward me, but only when Dad was looking. It felt like she was acting for a camera. She had 2 children from a previous marriage, who I might meet if I ever visited Dad's home. Dad asked me if I wanted to come live with them, but I couldn't pretend I wasn't hurt. I said no. Over time, it became clear we all sensed the same thing. Claire's kindness was more for display than sincerity. I finished school in my grandparents' town and worked hard to get into film school. I got accepted into the best one, but it was in the same city where Dad and his new family lived. I didn't want restrictions or constant monitoring, so I made Dad promise not to interfere if I moved there. He agreed eagerly, almost too eagerly. My grandparents convinced me to give the school a chance, so I did. Dad invited me to visit his home. I resisted at first, but eventually gave in. When I walked in, it didn't look like a place I ever belonged. The walls were covered with photos of Claire and her kids. Only a few pictures included Dad, and in those he looked thin, tired, almost ghost-like. Something inside me tightened. Dad offered to pay my tuition and begged me to stay with them, but I refused. I wanted to stand on my own feet. As I was leaving, I ran into Claire's kids, Adam and Aaron, the same boys who had bullied me years ago. My stomach twisted. I quietly told my grandparents, and they advised me not to tell Dad. They feared it would damage whatever relationship I had left with him. Over time, I learned more about Claire's past. Her former husband was wealthy, but she accused him of things that pushed him out of his children's lives. Dad had never wanted more kids, but he accepted hers for her sake. Those boys reminded him constantly that he wasn't their real father. They used him for anything they could get, and Claire never corrected them. Still, Dad kept trying. He kept pouring love into people who didn't return even an ounce of it. When I began college, I visited Dad on weekends for a while, until I stopped feeling welcome. And then everything changed. Dad became sick, terminally sick, late-stage cancer. Watching him in pain broke something inside me. But what hurt even more was realizing how alone he felt. Claire barely visited him. Her sons didn't come at all. Dad cried in front of me for the first time in my life. He told me how abandoned he felt, how ignored, how small. I tried speaking to Claire once, asking her to spend more time with him, and her cold response haunts me even now. She said she preferred focusing on her future instead of waiting for someone to become part of her past. After Dad passed away, Claire showed up to his wake for barely 15 minutes. just long enough to be seen. Her sons didn't come at all. I decided then that I was done with them. But just when I thought it was all over, Dad's lawyer called. He asked me to come to the mansion immediately. When I arrived, Claire and her sons were already there, looking irritated. The lawyer read Dad's will. Dad left me 70% of everything, including the mansion. He left 20% to his parents, and only 10% plus a small condo to Claire and her children. He also left a final message for me, an apology for not being the father he had wanted to be. I couldn't stop the tears. Claire was furious. She stormed out. I called her afterward and asked her to move her belongings out. She acted offended, accusing me of being heartless. I simply repeated something she had once said. I'm choosing to look toward my future, not my past. After that, she sent a few bitter messages, but I ignored them. A few days later, I returned from visiting my grandparents and found the mansion door wide open. My heart dropped. I called the police and the lawyer. The police went inside and found Claire and her sons. They claimed the house was still theirs, that Dad's will was fake, that the lawyer and I had manipulated everything. They almost got arrested on the spot. But the lawyer told me to wait. He had a plan. He returned with a small box and revealed something none of us expected. Dad had known Claire was unfaithful to him toward the end of his life. When she started treating him coldly and avoiding him, he grew suspicious. He spoke to his lawyer and added a private clause to his will. If Claire had been loyal and supportive until the end, her share would increase by 30%, taken from mine. She never knew about it. She lost everything because of her own choices. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like Dad had protected me. Even from beyond this world, he still kept me close. The lawyer cleared his throat and looked straight at Claire. He explained that while my father was still alive, he had added a special condition to the will. If Claire had remained loyal and supportive until the end, her share could increase by 30%, taken from my portion, but only if she agreed in writing while he was still alive, neutral. To make it valid, she had to sign a consent form. The lawyer told us my father wanted this to be fair and transparent. Shaken, shocked. Claire's eyes lit up instantly. The idea of getting even more out of my father's estate clearly thrilled her. She didn't hesitate. She signed the papers without reading them carefully, almost like she'd been waiting for this moment. Then came the part that made her face fall. The lawyer calmly pointed out the second part of the arrangement. If Claire was ever proven to have been unfaithful during the marriage, with actual evidence, she wouldn't just lose the extra 30%. She would also lose the original 10% she had been given. Her hand froze on the table. But she had already signed. She tried to laugh it off, insisting there was no way anyone could ever prove anything against her. She looked confident, cocky even. That confidence lasted about 30 seconds. The lawyer opened the box he had brought with him and took out a small flash drive and a thick envelope. He handed me the envelope and plugged the flash drive into his laptop. The videos he played were from a hidden camera my dad had installed in the living room months before he passed away. He hadn't told anyone. He'd started to suspect something was wrong when Claire's behavior toward him changed so suddenly, when she stopped visiting him in the hospital, when she began acting distant and cold. On the screen, we saw Claire in the living room with another man. The footage showed them being clearly affectionate with each other in my father's home. There was no way to twist what we were seeing. It was obvious. Inside the envelope were printed photos of Claire with the same man in different locations. Public places, private corners, cozy moments that didn't look like innocent friendship in the slightest. I felt sick and furious at the same time. My dad had died knowing this. Claire's face went pale. For the first time, she looked scared. She exploded, saying it was unfair, that she hadn't known there was proof, that she should have been told about the evidence before signing. She tried to argue that she'd been tricked, that the contract wasn't valid because she didn't know the full context. The lawyer didn't flinch. He calmly told her that the conversation we were having at that very moment, where he clearly explained the terms and she willingly signed, was also being recorded on a camera behind her. The whole thing was documented. She had nothing. He told her she needed to pack her belongings and leave the condo my father had temporarily allowed her to stay in. There was no more discussion to be had. Her sons, Adam and Aaron, tried to argue at first, but even they understood they were trapped. Adam eventually took her by the arm and led her out. They left, furious but powerless. Before he went home, the lawyer turned to me and quietly said, "Change your locks as soon as possible, and be prepared. We may be going to court, but you're on solid ground." I took his advice. I called my grandparents and told them everything. They were shocked, but not exactly surprised. They'd suspected Claire's intentions for a long time. They decided to come stay with me for a few days just so I wouldn't be alone in case anything else happened. A few days later, just like the lawyer predicted, Claire didn't give up. She found a lawyer of her own and tried to sue me for a larger share of the inheritance. Her claim? That she had been deceived into signing the document and that the will wasn't truly my father's wish, that he had been pressured or confused when he signed it. How she planned to prove any of that, I still don't know. My father's lawyer reassured me that the case was still in our favor. He had my dad's medical reports, the original will, the contract Claire signed, and all the footage and photos. He told me I had nothing to be afraid of legally, even though emotionally it was all draining. But Claire didn't stop there. She tried another angle, my grandparents. She showed up to see them, trying to sway them to her side. She told them that they had been given a smaller share of my father's estate because I had manipulated him. She tried to make it sound like I had convinced Dad to keep most of the property under my name. For a brief moment, my grandmother was shaken. She wondered if there was any truth to it. But my grandfather never doubted me. He has always been steady, calm, and rational. He stood his ground. When I spoke with them and asked if they wanted the mansion for themselves, it became crystal clear where my heart was. I wanted them to feel safe and honored, not sidelined. My grandmother realized Claire had been playing with her emotions. Whatever doubt Claire managed to plant vanished. When that didn't work, Claire called me and tried to threaten me over the phone. Her words were sharp and bitter, filled with veiled warnings about how she would make sure I regretted this. I recorded the call. We requested a restraining order, and we got it. The public drama, up to that point, everything had been handled quietly, between lawyers and family. Hardly anyone outside knew the full story. But Claire decided that if she couldn't win in private, she would win in public. She went to people in the film industry, the same community my dad had poured his whole life into, and began telling them a story where she was the victim. She claimed my father had pressured her into agreeing that everything would go to me and that I had now twisted the will to leave her with nothing. She painted me as selfish, cold, and ungrateful. But most people knew my father. They knew his character. They'd seen how he helped her find work and how he supported her children. Some people told her to get help. Others asked why she was making such a fuss over money when she had her own career. Her attempt to gain sympathy backfired badly. The production company that had hired Adam, the one that had given him a role thanks to my dad, decided they wanted nothing to do with the chaos. They quietly cut ties and ended his contract. They didn't want a scandal connected to their name. The only truly painful consequence for me was the media. Local tabloids picked up the story. They didn't know all the facts, but that didn't stop them from bothering me and my grandparents for comments. They followed us, called us, camped outside the house now and then. My dad's lawyer told us to say nothing and stay away from the noise, but every day it got a little harder to ignore. Another wave of attacks. Just when I thought Claire might finally back off, she escalated things again. Her legal team sent a letter claiming I was emotionally unfit to manage the estate. She argued that I was still grieving too heavily and did not have the mental stability or maturity to handle my father's assets. Reading that letter was like being punched in the chest. She even claimed that I had a history of mental health problems and wasn't capable of making rational decisions. She mentioned a few people, distant family friends, who supposedly expressed concern about me. I hadn't spoken to some of them in years. It was cruel. She took my grief, my pain, and tried to twist it into a weapon. My father's lawyer calmly explained that this was just another attempt to undermine me. He said we had enough evidence of my ability to manage the estate, my studies, my work, my financial records, and the fact that my father had chosen me intentionally and clearly. But the fact she was willing to go that far said everything about how determined she was to destroy my peace. On top of that, I started hearing from mutual acquaintances that Claire was contacting my dad's former business partners, trying to turn them against me. She told them I was ruining Daniel's legacy, that I didn't know what I was doing, that I would mismanage everything he'd built. Thankfully, most of them knew better. They had known my father for years and saw through her manipulations quickly. Then one day, things went from psychological to physical. I walked out to my car and saw long scratch marks carved into the side. On the windshield was a note that read, "Karma is coming for you." I couldn't prove it was Claire, but my gut told me everything. The timing, the message, the tone, it all felt like her. I filed a police report, but without evidence, there's only so much they could do. Still, the damage was done. I felt watched, unsafe. It wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was harassment. My lawyer began preparing to bring the restraining order back into the case and include harassment and defamation as part of the legal argument. At that point, I wasn't just trying to protect my legal rights. I was trying to protect my sanity. My grandparents saw how shaken I was. One evening, my grandfather gently suggested something I hadn't allowed myself to consider seriously before. Maybe you should sell the mansion, move somewhere far away, and start new, somewhere she can't reach you so easily. The idea was tempting. A clean slate, a place with no memories of Claire, no whispers, no cameras outside the gate. But this house had been my father's home. Letting go of it felt like letting go of him. The final court battle. Eventually, everything came to a head in court. Claire's side tried every angle they could, that she had been misled when signing, that my father had been pressured, that the will was not fully his decision, that I was unstable and incapable. The judge didn't buy it. The will was verified, the videos were reviewed, the signed document was clear. My father's mental state at the time of signing the will was confirmed by medical records and witnesses. The restraining order and her pattern of behavior didn't help her case either. After months of dragging this through stress and hearings, the court ruled in my favor. Completely. Claire's claims were rejected. The will stood exactly as my father intended. When the verdict was read, I glanced over at her. The shock on her face wasn't the dramatic movie kind. It was emptier, hollow, like she'd finally realized this was a battle she couldn't manipulate her way through. But the chaos wasn't quite over. In the hallway outside the courtroom, there was a loud argument between Claire and her sons. They raised their voices. I didn't hear everything, but it was obvious Adam and Aaron were furious at her, at the outcome, at the fact that they'd followed her lead only to end up with nothing. At one point, Adam stormed away down the hallway. Aaron followed soon after. It didn't look like they were on good terms with her anymore. That evening, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Adam. He apologized. He said he finally understood how much damage his mother had caused. He told me she had manipulated them for years, making them believe my dad was the villain, that he never cared about them, that he was selfish. He admitted they had been wrong about him, and about me. He asked if we could meet and talk, maybe start over. I listened. I appreciated the apology. I believed he was sincere, but I was done. I told him I wished him and his brother well, truly, but I didn't want a relationship. I had spent too long being the target of their cruelty, first as a child being bullied, then as an adult being dragged through court and public humiliation. I was finally free. I wasn't going to walk back into their storm. Months passed. The noise around the case faded. The media moved on to other stories. People in the industry stopped talking about Claire's drama, not because they forgot, but because they didn't care anymore. Her attempts to play the victim had failed. The industry my dad had helped her step into quietly turned its back on her. No one wanted to hire someone who had turned a private family tragedy into a public spectacle, twisting the truth and dragging my father's name around for money. Word spread. People talked. In the end, she wasn't seen as a victim. She was seen as the person who tried to tear apart the legacy of the man who had helped her. From what I heard, Adam and Aaron eventually cut ties with her. They moved out of the condo and stopped speaking to her. They tried to find work again, but most people didn't want to risk inviting that kind of drama into their projects. It's sad, in a distant, almost abstract way, but I can't pretend I feel sorry for them. They watched her lie. They joined in. They hurt my father when he was alive and tried to hurt me after he was gone. People are responsible for the choices they stand by. As for my grandparents, they have been my anchor through all of it. After everything settled, I made them an offer. I asked them to take the mansion. At first, they refused. They didn't want to feel like they were taking something from me. But I told them this. This house should belong to the people who truly loved him, and I want you to feel safe and honored, not like guests. Eventually, they agreed. They've already started making gentle changes, renovations here and there, fresh paint, fixing old corners, modernizing some things while keeping the heart of the house intact. It's still my father's home, but now it's also theirs, and that feels right. Knowing they're in that house gives me peace. And me? I'm leaving. A huge project came up overseas, a film job I never imagined I'd get this early in my career. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. It's a chance to rebuild my life somewhere new, to focus on my work without constantly looking over my shoulder. Before I go, I've been spending as much time as I can with my grandparents. We sit in the living room my father once walked through, with new plans on the table and old memories in the walls. I miss my dad every day. But I also know this. He did everything he could, in his own imperfect way, to protect me, even when he wasn't physically by my side. In the end, he made sure I would have a future that wasn't controlled by people who didn't care about either of us. Now, it's my turn to honor that, by choosing peace instead of chaos, by choosing distance instead of bitterness, by choosing my own life, not the one someone else tried to script for me. I'm closing this chapter with gratitude, for my grandparents, for the truth coming out, for the chance to move forward. And wherever I go next, I'll carry my father's love with me. That's the one inheritance no one could ever